I was taught by the Rebbe himself that any words uttered have to always have some practical impact. Not only some practical impact, that's the bottom line, not the inspiration, but what it evokes and causes us to do today and tomorrow and the next days. So with that being said, being that I'm the author of the book Torah, Meaningful Life, as Molly just mentioned, let me just give you a little more background, which will help put things into context. I grew up here in Crown Heights. I was born and bred in this community. My parents are both Russian-born. My father was Russian-born, meaning that his soul is not on this earth. And I'm like a part of the furniture of this neighborhood called Crown Heights, USA. Now, I grew up in a home where I received a Hasidic and a Torah education. I went to yeshiva. But maybe what was a bit unique was that my father was a journalist that wrote for secular newspapers, and therefore I was exposed to what we call a non-dogmatic Judaism, which I know is not so common today. It was a home where ideas were explored, we were never silenced, and basically our free spirits were allowed to express themselves. I say that because I don't know everybody here in this room, but I'm sure that you yourselves or others that you may know have had different type of experiences. And it was in my teenage years that I was extremely skeptical, but at the same time intrigued by the Rebbe who lived in this neighborhood. I saw him as a king on the hill, but I wanted to really understand what makes him tick. And to me, it was like the secret of what keeps Jews going thousands of years. You know, in business they say, they always try to advertise and demonstrate longevity by saying, like brewing beer since 1876 or selling furniture for 70 years, because it suggests family business. It suggests you can trust us, trial and error, even though most of these businesses have changed hands many times over. But Jews have been around for almost 3,500 years. So we've been in this business a long time. And it's hard to deny, even though many Jews have an identity crisis today, what it means to be Jewish, but it's hard to deny that there's some secret to this continuity. And that's what intrigued me, because at the same time I looked around, and not to be overcritical, but I didn't see everybody I met was necessarily an evolved human being. And being a teenager, like most of us, had my own rebellious stage. We won't go into details. We can compare notes another time. But I remember vividly a talk the Rebbe delivered, which addressed literally what I was going through when I was a teenager. And it was about the rebellion of young people. And the Rebbe's words were, to paraphrase, spoken Yiddish primarily, he was speaking about the rebellion of the 60s. And this is what he said. He said that some adults would have us believe that when young people rebel, it's considered to be something sacrilegious, something dangerous. They break rules, they challenge authority, and it causes trouble. And the Rebbe said that's not correct at all. The rebellion in young people comes from the fire in their soul that wants to change the world but doesn't know how, and is frustrated with the status quo. So it would be wise for adults who have more veteran wisdom and experience and seasoning to use that to help channel and guide this fire into a spiritual revolution. That was the gist of it. I was struck by these words. First of all, the relevance to me personally was profound, but also it wasn't something you usually heard from a 70-year-old Hasidic, as the New York Times would call it, ultra-Orthodox, right-wing, reactionary or whatever. And it sparked something inside of me, because it made me realize that the Rebbe, in the chain of Rebbes like himself, the previous Rebbe before him, his father-in-law, and generation after generation, straight an unbroken chain straight to Moses, were truly revolutionaries. They were not just traditional teachers. They were revolutionaries, pioneers. And Abraham stood up against an entire world, a pagan world, including his own family. And there were no synagogues to go to. He had no community to to go to. He had to build a community. And single-handedly founded what we call Judaism. Founded, I mean not in the technical sense of the word, but began to search for God and made it something that he committed to. So, to hear these words, to me, was resonating in the sense that this is the secret. Now, here's not the place or the time to go into, so what exactly happened? How did such revolutionaries become conformists, etc., etc.? But suffice it to say, not everybody has. And the reason that you're here now is because this revolutionary called the Rebbe and his wife, the Jacobson, together, in their own silent way, led a revolution. But not only they themselves, they ignited revolutionary spirit in hundreds, if not thousands, of people like myself and all the shluchim and shluchas that you know in your local communities that continue to go against the tide. And this requires strength. It's one thing to just do what everybody else does, but to try to transform the world is a whole other story. So I think it deserves an ovation to yourselves and to your community, to all the shluchim and shluchas. So let's everybody give a hand to all the shluchim and shluchas that... So though the Rebbe physically is not here, there's no question that his spirit lives on. I was just asked by a journalist last year, that's 18 years, almost 17 years since the Rebbe passed on. And how is it possible that this community is vibrant? They asked me, did anyone quit their job? Did any shliach or shlucha quit? And not one did. So you wonder, where's the secret to it? Where's the CEO? What's the trade, the corporate secret to this? So I just off the cuff, I said to the journalist, and he immediately smiled. I said, you have to remember that the Rebbe struck them when they were young and in their hearts. And when you do that, you change people's lives. And that's exactly what happened. There was an Israeli journalist here many years ago in New York. He came for Simchas Torah to 770. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Simchas Torah in 770, especially in those years. And he marveled. This was his main focus in his article. He marveled that he visited many synagogues across the United States, and every synagogue, what you see is predominantly elderly people. And here, he couldn't find too many elderly people. It was like 95% young people. And he realized that's a future. So this is not just theory, this is practical, and it's something that we can learn much about, because we would all love to teach our children and make sure they can teach their children to have this type of spirit. To not be part of the problem, but be part of the solution. So I want to talk a little more about that and your particular role in that area. So over the years, I decided, going back to those teenage years, I realized, it took a little time, but I came to realize this was something worth fighting for and worth passionately committing to, because it was revolution. That's exactly what I was looking for, though I couldn't articulate it at the time. So I became involved with a small group of individuals who would listen, as Mali had mentioned, to the Rebbe's words. It was also extremely intriguing to me, with all the technology in our times, simply listening with our ears, listening for hours and hearing the Rebbe speak, and having to reconstruct it. We're talking here now about sometimes 5-6 hours, with no support of any notes or any tape recorders. I'm not saying this to impress you, I'm just telling you a fact. Now, the truth is, all of us have it in our genes, because remember, for 1,000 years, from the time of Moses until the Mishnah and the Talmud were codified, all Jews did this. So all of you are capable of this. Okay, so that's what I'm going to train you to do, is how to be able to memorize hours like this, and you'll start tonight to see if you can repeat anything I said here. So people ask me the question, what is the secret to this? And though there's obviously natural gift, but I will share with you the secret, and actually the secret lies much more in yourselves, in women, than it is in men, as you'll see in a moment. When you look around in society, which segment of society remembers things best? Exactly. Kids, children. Good. And the question is why? Adults, we always have to find all kinds of gimmicks and tricks and gadgets to try to remember things. Children, stories, songs, even sometimes ridiculous words that were uttered to us could remain etched in our memories forever and ever. Sometimes things we actually want to forget even. How is that possible? Memory is definitely the faculty of the mind, and the mind of a child is far less mature than the mind and developed of the mind of an adult. So why do they remember better? And the answer briefly is because they don't think with their egos. So let me explain what I'm saying. When adults hear somebody speak, all adults, they immediately, from the outset, say to themselves, oh, I like the speaker, I don't like the speaker, I can make money with this, I can't make money with this, I can use it, I can't use it. We make quick judgments, and we are processing the information while it's being transmitted. Children, it may be hard to get their attention, but once you do, they absorb like a dry sponge, because their minds are not cluttered. It's a clean, new hard drive. The second point is that there are like two wheels in the brain. There are two wheels. One we'll call the processor and one we'll call the absorber. One part of your brain absorbs information. Another processes information. Being that we're already adults and have developed ideas, so when you hear something and you like it, you say, oh, this answers a question I had, this is consistent, or I disagree with it. We're processing while the words are being uttered. And when you process while you should be absorbing, there's no way you can remember it. The secret of memory is the secret of listening. So I've spoken to I've given many workshops, especially to couples. And you always hear the issue is couple therapy, you're not listening to me. And it's usually the woman that accuses the man of this more than the other way around. And the man will say, of course, honey, I heard every word you say, and he repeats it over like a tape recorder. He says, no, but you're not listening. I know you heard what I said. When you have healthy ears, you can hear. Listening is far more than hearing. Tape recorders also hear. Listening is the art of being able to really put yourself in the shoes of the other person, and not, as many people do, give you advice before you even finish your sentence, and then sometimes tell you something that has nothing to do with what you said. I remember just a while back, I was sharing something with someone, and they disagreed with me, and then I said something else, and they said, no, it's not that way. So I said, well, that's my opinion. They said, well, that shouldn't have been your opinion, Like they're telling me I should have changed my question to fit their answer, which is like, what is that exactly? Or like, the guy that goes on a date, the girl that for 2 hours he's talking about himself, narcissist basically, and after 2 hours he says, okay, enough about me. Now what do you think about me? I hope none of you have such spouses. But since they're not here, we could talk inside jokes, So the art of listening is the ability to really put yourself aside and just listen to another person, even if you don't like what they're saying, and the dignity of giving someone else the right to speak. That's something that's a pretty rare commodity today. That was the key secret to remembering the Rebbe's words. In one word in Hasidic thought, it's called bittul. If you've never heard of this word before, I'll introduce it to you now. Bittul. You could talk to your shluchim about this. Bittul is a very difficult word to translate into English. Maybe because the English language doesn't tolerate the concept. But bittul is a combination of modesty, humility. Maybe best word I would say is suspension of self and allow something else in. That's bittul. And that was what was critical. The Rebbe would speak brilliant ideas. And I can tell you, counterintuitively, the more I understood, the less I remembered. Because I got excited by the understanding. I had to constantly put an effort on shutting down the processor and just absorbing. It's like when you do research. When you're doing research, you shouldn't be coming to conclusions. You want to gather all the facts, and then you sit down, you start processing until you come to conclusions. Or you're standing in front of a court, a jury and a judge and jury. You don't want them to come to conclusion because there's a persuasive witness or persuasive evidence. You want them to hear everything and then process it. So processing should begin after absorbing. But most of us can't do it. Either we're not patient, or we're not trained, or we don't even know you have to do it. We don't even realize that we're processing. So I'm not going to go into a whole workshop on memory, though I have one. We could do that another time. But I wanted to make the point because this is a tremendous lesson in life that I learned from my own experience. And I think all of us can learn and can really change almost everything, every type of communication, any relationship. And just to give an example of what bittul is, let's take a story from Chelm. You've heard of the city called Chelm? Yeah. Oh yeah, you come from there? Yeah. Okay. Good. Well, every town has a little section called Chelem. Chelem was this town in Poland. They say wise people lived there, but the neighbors were very resentful of them, so they created this whole folklore of these fools of Chelem. You know. Okay, so in Chelem there was a little farm, and a farmer. So you can imagine the town was small. The farm was tiny, but it was a special farm because it was his baby. He inherited from his parents. They inherited from their parents. Every grain of soil was like his own child. He took care of. He knew every corner, and he took care of that farm like it was his own child, as I said. Well, one day he gets a message, a letter that his cousin from America is coming to visit Chelem, a farmer, a big town farmer, a big city farmer from, let's say, I don't know, where the biggest farms in the United States, Kansas, Texas, who knows? Anyway, you can imagine hundreds of acres. He's excited. He welcomes his cousin to Chelem, shows him around, gives him a royal tour of his magnificent farm. They sit down to dinner. So he says to his cousin, "So what do you think about my farm?" The Texan farmer. He asks the Texan farmer. The Texan farmer says, "Very nice and cute, but it's like it's tiny." He's taken all aback. He's insulted. You know, tiny. He says, "How big is your farm back in Texas?" So what is his cousin going to tell him? How is he going to give him a point of reference? So he says, "To my farm back home, well, let me put it this way. It takes all day for me to travel with my tractor from one end of the farm to the next." So suddenly the Chelem farmer looks at him with empathy and compassion and says, "Don't feel so bad. I once had a tractor like that too." You know? Now, the Chelem farmer did not in any way, was not being malicious. Like if we passed out a questionnaire here, and the question was, are you objective or subjective, narrow-minded, closed-minded? Very few people are going to mark over the box closed-minded and narrow-minded. Subjective, maybe. Because you see, part of subjectivity is that it makes you think you're objective. The Chelem farmer, when someone says, "I know something," you have to always add, "From my perspective, I know." The farmer couldn't fathom that size farm. He couldn't even imagine it. So it had to be there was something wrong with the vehicle. So it reminded him of his old shmata jalopy that took him all day to crank up to move from here to there. Couldn't imagine that it'd be that large. We all are subjective, all of us, myself, all of us, based on our perspectives. But God blessed us with the ability to acknowledge it. And that's why we go to people who are objective counselors or advisors or lawyers or accountants. Even though we don't necessarily listen, people pay thousands of dollars to consultants not to listen to them, but that's another story. And because we want to have a more objective perspective. Our perspectives are based on the horizons we're familiar with. Everyone's got a farm. Bittul is the key to any growth, because it's tests to you. You don't know it all, and there's something bigger. And you speak to someone else, even though you may not agree with them, they may have something to say that is worth hearing. And if you're just going to fit their words into your old frameworks, you will not grow. So it requires courage, it requires security, it requires honesty and integrity to be able to listen like that. And across the board, so Hasidic thought makes this a staple, a foundation to all growth. Just to show an example, several examples. A seed has to rot in the ground before it grows into a sapling, into a beautiful tree. A mother goes through birth pains to give birth to a beautiful child. We all go through the awkwardness of adolescence. Creativity is a child of frustration. The greater the creativity, the more the frustration that will precede it. You have to melt a piece of gold to turn it into a beautiful ornament. Everything in life, metamorphosis that's worth talking about, goes through a state of bittul. Meaning, it's in one state, it goes through some type of void or vacuum or transformation, like a cocoon, and it emerges a beautiful butterfly. This is the secret of life. A few months ago, I remember someone coming to my class. I give a weekly class in Manhattan. And she shares with me a beautiful story, which just remained with me. Her little niece, or maybe 5 years old, her mother was pregnant. And the little niece says to her mother, her niece she's telling me the story about her niece, says to her sister, to her mother, to the mother of the niece. I'm getting confused myself by what I'm saying. It would be simpler if I just changed it, but I didn't want to change the story. That a daughter said it to her mother, but you get the idea. And she says, Mommy, how do you have room inside of you for another human being? I don't know what the mother answered, but the question alone struck me. Because I started to think about it. I'm a man, and men don't even have room for people outside of them. Forget about inside of them. And here, God created a human being, a woman, with the ability not just for a little compartment, her whole life changes. I can't even imagine it. They say if the men were the ones that were pregnant, we wouldn't have any children. I think the only species on Earth where the men are actually a seahorse, just for the record, in case you're interested in the trivia. You can use that on your husband once in a while if you like. You say, maybe you should be a seahorse or something, But I came to realize that it's not just a physiological thing, it's actually a spiritual thing. And it made me aware of so many of the talks the Rabbi spoke about the power of the women of this generation as I began this evening. That there is, even though God created all human beings, and God created the human being, both male and female, equal two halves of one whole, each has their role, but in some way, it seems that women have a little more bittul than men. Naturally. Can't say across the board, no one wants to generalize, but it seems that way in many, many areas in life, and especially when it came to the challenging moments in Jewish history, it was always apparent. So you all know the story of the first of all Holocausts that we suffered was at the hands of Pharaoh and the Egyptians. So this is why we celebrate Passover, and so on. Pharaoh, who thought he was a brilliant guy, and maybe he was, when he heard from his stargazers that a man will rise to lead the Jews out of Egypt, a savior, meaning Moses, he fell upon a great idea. What he'll do is, he decreed that all Jewish boys born should be thrown into the river Nile. Eliminate the problem. What happened? So the Talmud says, the Medrash says, that the men and women, the husbands and wives, had a secret meetings about this, and they said, what do we do? And the men said, you know what, we should stop having children until this crazy decree is over. We'll start killing every boy. And the woman responded, if we don't have children, how are we ever going to get out of this godforsaken place? We'll die here. Basically what they said. They said, we'll figure it out. And they prevailed, the women did. And they found ways. The Talmud says the women, when they were to bear children, would go to the fields. And of course the story in the Bible itself, in the Torah itself, was Yocheved took her little boy Moses and put him in the basket, which she made waterproof, put it on the edge of the river Nile, and that's how Moses survived. And actually Pharaoh's daughter was the one that saved him, etc. What's the message of this story? It's a very profound and very simple message. That Pharaoh, like anyone, always thinks in terms of their own power. What's a challenge to me? It's not going to be the women and the children. They can be subdued. It's the men. The men are going to want to bear arms. They're powerful, aggressive. They'll be the challenge. He didn't realize that the power of the Jews was not in armies and military and in weapons. It was in faith. And it was the women that had more faith than the men did. And that he did not know how to vanquish. He probably till this day doesn't know what happened. That the woman quietly simply said, we're going to have the children, we're going to figure it out. Now many boys were killed, but many didn't. And the one that mattered, was most important, was Moses. So the subtle power of faith is a natural power of bittul. It's not something purely rational, but it's not irrational either. It's recognizing there's a bigger picture to life. And even though right now something may be uncomfortable or something may not be convenient, if you think of the bigger picture, you forego certain things to make sure that you win. You may lose the battle, but you win the war. And throughout history, you find that women always stood at the forefront. And I'm not saying this, I hope it doesn't come across in any, I know sometimes I say this, I speak to sometimes very avid and I would say even, I wouldn't say violent, but aggressive feminists. And I've been around, and some of them start saying, okay, you're starting to patronize and all that. I'm telling you, these are not made-up stories. This is the history of our history. Not to think that I have anything against men. Men did also play a role, so we can't say they're not at all valuable. I hope you all agree that they play some important role, right? I mean, the fragile male ego needs to know that they at least are an accessory to the story here. Now they say today, latest scientific discovery. Did you know this, Molly? You can use this. Okay, is that all children, as soon upon conception, are actually female. It takes a mutation to turn it into a male. Yeah. Just don't use it against me. But yeah, that's what they say. Yeah, scientists.
What did God say?
God doesn't say anything about it. He left it up to discussion. Anyway, the point is that.
Actually, Rivka said, he said male and female, he created them. God said.
So what does that say? Which one was first?
Male.
I don't know. It doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. I mean, with great due respect to Rivka, you know.
No, I didn't. I just said it's male. What does that mean?
I don't know if that means it means together. That's all right.
Were created, but they weren't born. So he says the study says when they're born female.
Okay, listen. You know how it goes. The story goes that a man wears the pants in the family, and the woman tells him what pants to wear. So what's the difference at the end of the day? That you agree with? So don't give us this male first thing, okay? You sit at the head of the table, but you'll sit there because I told you to sit there, right? I understand. I've been around. I'm married, you know. So bottom line is that this bittul, which is in my opinion a secret, not in my opinion, this is the opinion of the Torah, is a secret to all success. And if you apply it to any situation in life, you'll see whether it's communication, like I said, being able to listen to someone else, even on that basic level. Being able to listen to your children. How many times maybe we're too harried and we can't listen to them. Being able to grow in any possible way is always leaving open the possibility of another perspective. That doesn't mean that you have to compromise your own values, God forbid. It means that that's how we grow, that's how we learn. And it's harder, obviously, as we get older, because when we're younger, as I said, children are like a dry sponge, so they're receptive to it. Which leads me to what I mentioned before about this revolution, the revolution. You know, this is sometimes not so politically correct, because we live in a society where there's so many different standards and mores. But I can tell you, from day one when the Rebbe assumed leadership, and though, as I mentioned, which tonight is Chav Bei Shvat, the 22nd of Shvat, is the 25th yahrzeit of the Rebbe's wife, the Rebbetzin, in 1988, that she was very quiet, very private. We knew not much about her. But there's no question that the Rebbe and her were one, and you could tell in many different situations and different stories that we've heard. And I want to share one, but before I go there, I wanted to say was that from day one of the Rebbe's leadership, and this is the early 50s, which was not so popular, the Rebbe immediately began, one of the earliest things was empowering the women of the generation. And he insisted that they not just be housewives and mothers and wives, but also to be partners of their husbands in leading and being influenced in their community. Now this was the Rebbe's position about everybody. He wanted everyone to be leaders and not followers. But particularly with the women, he took special attention because he realized, I guess, and anticipated that this would be a critical component in the challenges that would be coming up ahead. So the story I wanted to share was with the Rebbetzin, being that today was her yahrzeit, and the gathering, the Kinus Hashluchas, is in connection with her this special day, which was a sad day, to be very honest. 25 years ago, it was hard to see the Rebbe grieve like he did openly. And I can tell you personally, I sat at the feet of the Rebbe for many years. When the Rebbe's mother passed away in 1964, it was very private and you couldn't really tell. I mean, you could tell he sat Shiva and all that, but besides that, it was very discreet about it. And 1988, in contrast, it was very, very obvious in every possible way. I mean, literally, the Rebbe crying publicly, speaking about her. He moved his whole operation in the office to the house where they had lived. I mean, and you could see he went out of his way to make sure that everyone understands how much impact. He did things that beyond that had to be done. Like he didn't have to move to his house, but he chose to do that, to honor her, whatever the reason may be. There was no Farbrengen that passed that year where the Rebbe did not mention her. And he would say, V'hachayit na liboy. Her name was Chaya Mushka. Hachayit na liboy, and the living shall take to heart. and he instituted different customs. The idea of having birthdays, that we should celebrate birthdays. It was a direct honoring her on her birthday, 25th of Adar that year. He established different organizations. I mean, it was very obvious, and it was also very painful to see, because the Rebbe was showing his vulnerability in a way. And it was clear that it was an equal partnership. And though, as I said, she was much more a silent partner, not so active in the community, but that didn't make it less impactful. And it reminded me of a story with the Rebbe, that there was a couple once came to see a Rebbe, a shliach and a shlucha, and the Rebbe turns to the wife, the shlucha, and says, "I hope that you are being an equal partner with your husband in the work that you do in your community." She says, "Well, I try my best." That's the way she put it. And the Rebbe said, "In America they say when you say you're trying your best, it means you're not doing anything, So she said, "Well, to be honest, it's hard and so on, but we do host every Friday night. We have the people," and she described some of what she was doing, but she was already being open. So she says to the Rebbe, "To tell you the truth, also, I rarely feel appreciated. My husband is the one that gets all the compliments, which is great. I have no problem with that, but you're not appreciated really for all the work you do." So the Rebbe looked at her and said the following. He said, "You're absolutely right. We live in a world people often don't appreciate what they should appreciate. But I'll just tell you something that you should remember. That when people compliment, in this superficial world, they compliment, and they come to a beautiful home, they compliment the curtains, the furnishings, the chandelier, the paintings on the wall. You never hear anyone say, 'Oh wow, how powerful a foundation must be under this building that keeps it going.' You never hear anyone say it. Because frankly, no one even knows what a foundation looks like, and no one thinks about it. So again, the Rebbe said, absolutely wrong. They should be thanking you and acknowledging. But just remember that in this world, the real things are never really appreciated." The story I wanted to share with the Rebbetzin was one I personally heard from someone that happened with. We don't have many stories, so this one I thought it was quite interesting, nice little story, nice anecdote. Was in the mid-60s, she would come visit 770, where her mother lived. So I don't know if you're familiar with some little Chabad history. So when the previous Rebbe came to America, they finally bought the 770, the synagogue. It was in 1940. And the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, lived on the second floor with his wife, Rebbetzin Chamedina. And the third floor was the oldest daughter. And the Rebbe had his office on the ground floor, but he lived in a different place. The Rebbetzin Chaimushka, meaning the second daughter, would come often after her mother passed away in 1970. But till that point, she would come very often, almost daily, to visit her mother. So one day she pulls up, and she comes out with a bunch of bags. She had gone, obviously, shopping for her mother. It was the middle of the summer, and she's walking up the steps, and then a little boy, who I heard the story from, he's already in Olam Ha'emes, he's passed on, he died prematurely, his name is Yosef Yitzchak Tevel. He runs over to the Rebbe and says, "Can I help you with the bags?" So she gave him a few bags. They walked up the steps to 770. As they came into the synagogue, near the elevator, the Rebbetzin noticed that he had a cast on his arm. He had broken his arm. He must have been playing, or she had a white cast. And she noticed that. She says, "You don't have to bother. You can leave the bags here." But he insisted. So he went up with her in the elevator to the second floor. And when she went into the apartment of her mother's, he said, "Wait out here." So he waited. She came back a minute later. She brought this big, like a roll of chocolate coins, and she gave it to him, the kid. So she gave it to him like a so-called gift. And he had this chutzpah, so he says to her, "Does anyone speak Yiddish here?" Okay, I'll say it in Yiddish and I'll translate. The chutzpah I know everybody knows. So she says to him, it's just nice, and I'll say it in the original, then I'll translate. He says to the Rebbetzin rather, he says, "Rebbetzin, ich komme von einer chassidische Mishpache. I come from a Hasidic family. And uns hat man aufgehört, and us they educated, aber schas mit tut a teve für a Id, nehmt nicht kein Abzahl, und speziell für Rebbetzin. When you do a favor for a Jew, I was taught, you don't take a payment and reward, especially from the Rebbetzin." That's what he said to her. Little kid. Anyway, he told me that the Rebbetzin gave him this broad smile from ear to ear, and she said the following. She said, "Dacht sich mir, als ich komme echt von einer chassidischen Mishpache." Which means, I believe that I also come from a Hasidic home. Remember, she's only the wife of a Rebbe, the daughter of a Rebbe, the granddaughter of a Rebbe, the great-granddaughter, 7 generations of Rebbes. It doesn't get better than that. And she says, so dacht sich mir, ich komme echt von einer chassidischen Mischpache, und uns hat man aufgehört wird, als beschaß mit Gita Eppes, nennt man, was bezahlt guten chocolate. And she said that I also presumably come from a Hasidic home, and us they taught that when you're given something, you take it, and especially a good chocolate. That's what she said. Now, I know it's a nice little cute story, but if you know the caliber of the people we're talking about here, every word counts. And I've thought about these words because there's sometimes, in humility, or false humility, we refuse sometimes to say, hey, it's not for me, I'm too small for this, I'm too big. There was a Rabbi Avram Hecht who just passed away a few weeks ago, who happened to be a father-in-law of my sister's. Told me a story when he was a young man here in Crown Heights, an American boy. The previous Rebbe suggested to him, told him to go out, as he was encouraged, to go to the synagogue on Shabbos and speak between the prayers, teach. So he told the Rebbe, I'm a young guy, my brothers are real good speakers, I'm not the speaker, blah, blah. And the Rebbe, Friedrich Rebbe, told him these words. He said to him, misplaced humility is rooted in arrogance. So I say this to all of us, especially to yourselves. You know, there are times to be humble, there are times to know we have responsibility and a job to do. God bless every one of you, your own way, and it's using now the Rebbe's words, to be leaders. Leaders in your home, in your communities, in every person you come in contact with. It's simple as that. We either influence or will be influenced. As coming from a house of a journalist, I can say, in journalism they say there are people who make things happen, there are people who watch things happen, and there are people who ask what happened. As Jews, we're always at the forefront, as I said, pioneers that make things happen, but especially the women of a generation. There was in the last year and a half of the Rebbe's talks, till he suffered a tragic stroke, there wasn't a farbrengen that passed, a talk that he didn't mention, that is the merit of the women and the girls of this generation that Mashiach will come. And I'll share with you a story that years earlier, I think it was also in the late 60s, the Rebbe told the following episode, but he added a footnote to it, which is really interesting. The story goes, this is a well-known story, but the Rebbe repeated it. You all have heard of the Arizal, right? The Holy Ari. He was a 16th century, maybe the greatest mystic of them all, in Tzfat. The Arizal, one Friday, he turns to his students and says, let's go to Jerusalem. Everyone understood what it meant. It means let's go greet Mashiach. So a few of the students said, we got to go back home and tell our wives or ask our wives. So the Arizal heard that. He said, okay, clearly the time has not come. And that was that. The opportunity was lost. So the Rebbe said, that was then. This time around, Mashiach will tell this first to the women. And they should make sure not to make the same mistake and say they have to talk to their husbands first. I said, they'll go, and trust me that the husbands will follow. Now, of course, God forbid that the Rebbe felt that the men was not respectful. What did the Arizal mean? The men shouldn't go tell their wives? It's not nice. When you're running off to Jerusalem with Mashiach and leaving us here in the Tzfas, Clearly, obviously, the coming of Mashiach is not something that comes every day. And obviously the world would find about it quickly. It wasn't a point of abandoning. It was a point that we had an opportunity, and we have to just go. When you're in a war, you go. One of the most beautiful compliments that I heard this from so many parents when in this community, when students would grow up, whether boys or girls, and they would start leaving and traveling to different communities. So sometimes it would just be for the summer, or for a year, a different school, and so on. And the Rebbe would often say to the parents, he would thank them, he says, thank you for bringing your children to this point, and I'll take over from here. This was always seen as the biggest merit for parents, because it means that we did something right, We mobilized these kids. And it was interesting because the Rebbe once wrote in a letter to somebody who said, well, my aged grandmother doesn't really want me to go. So the Rebbe wrote a letter to the mother saying, when it comes to war, how could you build an army if you have soldiers who have to go ask permission from their mothers every day? And I think I say this, even though I may sound controversial, because I think the greatest merit for any parent is to see, I have married children, is to see their children learn to fly. And you want to empower them to be even better than we are. Now, God forbid, not in any disrespectful way, but on the contrary, it's the greatest merit. So I want to bless you all that you should see children and grandchildren, whatever age you're going through, whatever stage you are in life, that will make you proud, make your husbands proud, make the communities proud, that will really take this to another level. And it's our role, seriously, our role is to engender, is to plant these seeds from the earliest age of our children to know they can change the world. And this is not just a Jewish message, this is a message, I could say, psychologically. Imagine the power of children knowing that we can be on the offense, we don't have to play defense, that whatever comes our way we can deal with. Not only can we deal with, we can change the world, literally change the world. That we're not bystanders, and we're not observant Jews observing others in that sense, but we are proactive. That we are ability, as I said, to make things happen. So you have that particular mission, and it was time and again, 3 times a year, the Rebbe would speak specifically to the women, special gathering, and it was always the message, the underlying message, that you have the power to change the future. Now, obviously, men have their role, and that's not the discussion here right now, but this, I think, is a critical message because it can carry on, not just today, but when you go back home to your communities. And it's the message that children need to hear more than anything else, that they are sent here on a purpose, and they have the ability to fulfill God's unique mission given to them. Every one of us is indispensable, has a unique mission that no one else but you can fulfill. I believe that each one of us would feel that way, which really means, in different words, to be a shliach or a shlucha. What does that mean? It means to be an ambassador, a messenger. You were chosen to be here on this earth for this time because you can do something that no one else but you can do. Tell me if there's more powerful message than that. And what would it preempt if each person felt this way? How many issues and challenges and emptiness and all the other blues that people go through in life? So I want to bless you all in the merit of this special day, the 25th yahrzeit of the Rebbetzin, who together with the husband, as I said, created a revolution. The revolution continues on. It's our role today to carry the baton, the leg of the marathon that has been carried for thousands of years. And it's an awesome responsibility, an awesome gift. And you were blessed, as I said, with the final blessing that the Rebbe said, that b'schus, in your merit, there will be a revolution, and we will finally experience the spiritual revolution of Mashiach Tzidkenu, a world that will be filled with divine knowledge as the waters cover the sea. And what better pride that you could feel that you were part of leading that revolution. Thank you very much.